Hello, it's Kelly Jensen again with Homesteading Hints, and today we're going to be talking about tomato transplanting into the garden. Tomatoes are kind of one of my favorite plants, and we will have a lot of tomatoes this year. I believe about 75, 10 different varieties. So it's one of the ones that I actually probably work the most at and just kind of pay attention to more than most of my other garden plants. But I enjoy all the different varieties of tomatoes, which there are. Oh, there's a lot of variety. I would guess there's easily over 400, maybe over 500 or more varieties of tomatoes that you can find. So you have your choice of, lots of different varieties of tomatoes. There's paste tomatoes, there's, your slicing tomatoes, there are cherry tomatoes, grape tomatoes, and any of those in between. Just about any color, greens, whites, yellows, oranges, red, dark purple to almost black. And pinks, just lots of different things that you could look for in a tomato. And the flavors, the flavors are different. And if you are kind of like my wife and I, we test all of them out, and there are certain varieties that we keep year after year, and we do save the seeds on them, so we can keep them year after year and keep our own varieties that we want to have every year. Seed saving is very easy on tomatoes as well. You usually only have to keep them about 30 feet apart if you want to do that. So it's very simple. And you just squeeze the seeds out of a tomato, and we'll show you that on one of the other videos later on, I'm sure. So, but today we're just going to do the planting, and I can show you all the materials that we use for planting tomatoes. This is our actual tomato cage, which is just two cattle panels put together in a frame, wired at the top, and so we don't have any side or round looking tomato cages. They're actually, the tomatoes will lean into each other and just kind of hold each other up that way, and we just guide them up through the cage basically, and let them hold themselves up once they get a little bit larger. And we make it so that the smaller wires are on the bottom, and on a cattle panel the bigger wires here are on the top that you can just reach through. And there actually has been a few times where we almost couldn't get the tomato through this big hole. So there's some pretty good sized tomatoes that come out of this sometimes. So this is actually our setup for that. Now we use in the bottom of our, I dug a trench, and that's how I usually do it. You can dig each one separate if you'd like, and especially if you don't have a whole lot of them. But with 75 tomatoes going in, we'll have a large trench like this, and we'll just put them in and cover them back up again. So that's actually a lot easier for us. The trench, as you can see, this is just a smaller trench. When I do the whole thing, it'll be probably 80 to 90 feet long, something like that. I usually put the tomatoes about 15 inches apart, so just over a foot really, which is fairly close on a lot of scales, but it doesn't seem to affect them much. There's enough airflow in between, and since I only put one row in a line, it doesn't get a whole lot of the mildews and the moisture holding up on the leaves that it can when they're crammed together if they're in close proximity and surrounding each other. So with this wind flowing through, it usually stays pretty clear of that as well. Now we're not actually going to plant the tomatoes today, because it actually, this weekend, is supposed to be down to 39, 38 degrees, which is pretty low for a tomato. But I wanted to get the video in before you all planted your tomatoes, so that you can kind of get an idea of what we do, and maybe take some ideas from that to do it your way as well. So we just went ahead and we're going to do this and let you see how we actually plant our tomatoes. So this one is a Blue Beauty, and as you can see, this is one that we did plant March 15th when I did the video on planting in the plug trays, and we planted them up into a peat pot. It's been just under a month ago. So you can see that the thing is, it's well over a foot tall right now, and they all look like this. They look really nice this year. We've had some very sunny days in the greenhouse, so it gets very warm in that, and they absolutely love the hot temperatures. So it's been real good on them, and they've grown very well this year. Now, first thing I do on these is I'll take the leaves off, the bottom leaves off of the tomato, and you just kind of pop them off like that, and then place them down in. And as you can see, the trench is deeper than the actual tomato. It goes well above the actual root line of the tomato as it is right now. So that would be the first thing. Next thing, I actually use eggshells from all the baby chicks that we've hatched and anything we've eaten. I'll use a bunch of eggshells and I'll put them around the pot down in the hole, okay? And this is for calcium for the tomatoes, which if you get blossom end rot, the reason for blossom end rot is a calcium deficiency in the plant. Now, it's not that we don't have a lot of calcium in our soil, it's just that the soil holds the calcium and isn't allowing the calcium to be readily available by the plant. So that is why we'll just go ahead and add the eggshell, which is kind of a slow release fertilizer, basically is what it is. It will slowly release and break down under the soil and can then be utilized by the plant as it breaks down. So since eggshells are almost entirely calcium, that works out very well for us. If you don't have anything like that, you can get like granulated calcium and stuff like that will work the same way. But if you have, most people have some sort of access to eggshells. If you do, just go ahead and use those. Those work real well. Okay, so you can see that we're down in a good 6 inches, which you can go even deeper than that. This is how deep my tiller went. So that's as far as I'm going to go with it. And when the soil level's up to where it should be, it'll be about right in there. Now you could probably take the soil level all the way up to about in here if you wanted to, which I would do if I was planting 8 or 10, but since I'm planting 75 and that's as deep as the tiller goes, that's how we're going to do it. Now there's some people that will lay them down like this and bend the tomato kind of halfway up and then cover it, and the tomato will rise up and straighten up as it, after a few days it will. I choose not to do that more because I don't like to have my leaves down so low to the soil, and I get a little concerned with some of the leaves touching the ground and getting some of the diseases and things like that from the soil that you can get. So some of the mildews and things. So that's really all we do on that part. Now I'll go ahead and we'll cover it up, get it to the level that we want it right here. Okay, so that's basically how it would be once it's planted. So it's down in a good 4, 5, 6 inches, and the soil is around it, setting up here past that first set of leaves that I already took off. Then I go ahead and I always add one of these. This is just a plastic 1 gallon or 2 gallon pot, whatever you choose to do. I think this one's actually a 2, but I cut the bottom off of it. Then I work it into the soil a little bit. I'll take a little bit of soil and go around the outside of it as well to hold it, because the wind will blow them away if you don't. And basically that's kind of a protection for the tomato. So it blocks the wind just a little bit on it. It keeps the wind, when it really gets blowing, from beating them all to heck as it can. The wind's been blowing like crazy around here these days. So that kind of holds it so that they're a little bit protected. Although this tomato is almost too big for this actual pot. I didn't have any pots that were this large. I usually honestly don't have tomatoes quite this large. These have really taken off this year. They're usually more down in the 10 to 12 inch range instead of 12, 15 inches probably is how tall this one is. So, but it will still do the same job. The other thing that this does is it actually heats up the soil. The black absorbs the heat from the sun, which will heat up the soil and heat up the area around the tomato, which actually helps them push more root growth and push more growth actually altogether, because of the amount of heat that a tomato actually likes to grow. So hopefully, what it usually does is it slows down the stress level a little bit. It stops the stress level from being quite so harsh on them. Tomato transplants can have a bit of stress, especially since they've gone from a greenhouse to the outside. Now, a lot of people will do what they call hardening off, which means they take them out of the greenhouse or out of the house during the day, put them out in kind of a half sunny, half shady area out of the wind and just kind of let them be outside for, say, a week or two, and then take them in every night so that they don't get cold, and they do that for about a week or two. That's probably recommended. I usually don't do that so much, again, because the greenhouse is actually unheated. I usually open the windows and the doors to keep some air circulation in there, so they usually don't stress out too much on me, because they're kind of already in that situation a little bit, as it were, anyway. So, okay, so that's close to being done. Now, I usually use grass clippings as my mulch, and I would recommend grass clippings. And what I do is I stick them down in the pot after I planted, and I work them around the tomato and kind of pack them in a little bit, and that will keep any weeds from sneaking in on the inside. Okay, so you have a really good set. Grass clippings are probably one of the best mulches there is. They have good nitrogen in them. They mat real well, which means that they aren't going to allow weed seed to push through very easily, and they dry up nice and stay put. Once they're kind of packed in, they don't blow very well. So they will release a lot back into the soil, and they do a very good job of keeping the weeds down and keeping the moisture in. So that's pretty much how I would do it. Now, I would probably water this in as well, first thing, because a tomato transplant is going to need some water. I probably only water tomatoes generally once or twice during the entire time that we have them planted. I usually watch the weather, and if it's going to rain in a couple of days, I'll hit them with the water one time, and I'll allow the rains to do the rest after that if possible. If I can't, I maybe will hit them a couple of times during that time. But the grass clippings and the fact that I buried them deeper usually makes it so you don't have any sort of issue with keeping them wet. And a tomato absolutely does not have to have a lot of water, okay? If it's moist enough to, when you stick your finger into the ground to find any sort of moisture in that soil, the tomato is not needing any water at all. So I very rarely water tomatoes at all during the entire season. Just those first times to get it started, and then from then on, they're on their own, and they absolutely do very well for me. So we end up with a lot of tomatoes usually in a year. Yes.
Do you notice a difference between the hybrids and the heirlooms depending on how much rain you get throughout the year?
Okay, that's absolutely a good question. First off, we grow pretty much primarily heirloom tomatoes. Now, we do have one hybrid. That's because Libby likes the Super Sweet 100 cherry tomatoes, so that's our one hybrid tomato, actually. Everything else is heirloom, and the heirloom varieties, I have noticed over the years, do a lot better in a drier situation. They don't look for moisture. They don't require moisture. They don't need it. Okay. Now you can get hybrids that don't need it as well, if you choose that as one of the points that you're looking for in that hybrid. You know, if you're choosing production, you're choosing size, you're choosing
flavor,
disease resistance, flavor, all that kind of stuff is all different on a hybrid and can be chosen for. On heirlooms, they were chosen according to the area they were developed. So say like a Bulgarian Triumph is a Bulgarian tomato from the start. So in Bulgaria, it's what conditions they had wherever they started growing that seed, and it's worked its way over all these probably hundreds of years, at least, you know, several, decades for sure. But over that time, and I've noticed it too on the ones that when we've saved seeds, some of our seeds are on the third or fourth generation easily by now as well, and they're different according to that season that we had when we saved the seeds as well. Some of them, like Bulgarian Triumph for one, likes a little bit more moisture than, say, Ukrainian Heart, which seems to like a little bit drier for us. Now that's probably how it was developed according to the seed, the year that we planted, or the couple of years that we saved seeds on, or the year that we saved seeds on it for the several other years that we've had. And so it can be noticed in all that kind of stuff on an heirloom or a hybrid variety as well. And so it's kind of, what are you looking for? Hybrids have a lot more tomatoes generally than heirlooms. Now you can get some pretty good batches of heirloom tomatoes, but we usually assume that we would have done better production wise with hybrids, but we prefer the flavor, and we have enough room, and we choose to grow enough tomatoes that it really doesn't matter to us to have a little bit less on production. So we go ahead and have all of our different heirloom varieties of tomatoes, get our different flavors, get our different styles, looks, colors, all that kind of thing, which we enjoy in the tomato as much as production. I mean, it doesn't bother us to have a little bit less on the production. So we go ahead and have heirlooms on pretty much everything. So it's also, if you're saving seeds, if you want to save seeds on a hybrid tomato, it's not going to come out with the same tomato that you started with, because a hybrid is a cross of several different variety of tomatoes. They take, pollen from one variety and put it on the flower of the other variety. So if they do that, it becomes a hybrid cross, which means that it's not going to breed true, and the seeds are not going to be like the parentage was. So the heirloom varieties have developed over the years the traits that they have, and as long as you keep them separate from another variety, they are going to be that same variety every single year. So
along that line, you discussed you have bees as well. Do you find that that's gonna cross-pollinate that way, or it's not as big a deal?
On bees and tomatoes are actually more of a self-pollinator per se. So the bees usually don't work too much on the flowers on the tomato. You won't see too many bees on them, or too many bugs for that matter anyway. They're mostly a self-pollinating. So 30 feet is being generous to say that you couldn't save seeds from one that is even 10 foot apart. But if the wind does blow, or a bee does happen to land on it and check something out and then goes to another one to check it out, that's where you can get that cross-pollination in. But generally speaking, they self-pollinate, which means that they're dropping from one flower to another that's next to it, or the wind blows a little bit and it shakes it off and goes on the other one. So they don't have a lot of carrying potential that way as far as the cross-pollination. Things like sweet corn, for instance, is recommended a half mile or more for pollination on sweet corn, so you don't cross-pollinate, which is pretty hard here in the state of Iowa, considering corn is growing everywhere, and pollination of corn with other corn happens. It doesn't have to be sweet corn, it can be any kind of corn. So it's very difficult on those, but tomatoes and peppers for that matter, are both very easy and usually don't have a whole lot of crossover. So that part hasn't been too much of a problem. Other things like squash, cucumbers, things like that, the bees will work on a lot more for us, and they do a lot more pollinating for those types of things than the tomatoes itself. So I believe that's about it.
How do you know what tomatoes you have planted where?
Okay.
So that as far as saving seeds.
Okay, yes. We talked about that. I forgot to mention that I have a tag up here. This tag will write down the variety, which actually in this spot it's going to be Bulgarian Triumph, because the Bulgarian Triumph we are needing to save seeds from that this year. So I'll write the name on that and keep that tag with that variety. And when we actually put these cages like side by side in a big row, and we will put a marker and move these markers where we need them, as far as so this way will be this variety, next variety will be on the next tag, and so on. And that way we can kind of keep track of which varieties have done the best for us, and what the year looked like as far as moisture or as far as heat and all that kind of stuff, and see which one does better for us. A lot of our varieties are not similar looking, so we don't have too much concern on picking them out, but there's a few of them. We have a couple of pink varieties, we have a couple of red varieties in there that we can get crossed up on if we plant them next to each other. So it just kind of gives us an idea of how things look and how the progress and whatnot on the tomatoes for the year. So we just kind of go with that, and it works pretty well for us. So I think that's about it. If you have any questions on tomatoes or anything else, just give the garden center a call and ask for me. And until next week, see you later. Thanks.